I can ho'opipili. Okay. So it's rather quiet. Somebody should be talking. You know, meantime while we're getting ready, but you're not. Yeah.
Aloha mai kako, Papa Ola Lōkahi is here. We've got two amazing presenters who can't wait to get started. Dr. Keawe Aimoku Kaholokula and Anakala Earl Kava'a, they're standing by. We're going to allow a few moments to let people into the room, but it's E Ola Mau Day. It's Wednesday noon. We're glad that you're here, and we can't wait for to present episode number 2 of the E Ola Mau Report to the Community series. Meanwhile, I think that Dr. Kaholokula and Anakala Kava'a might like to know where you're calling in from. Let us know in the chat, or if you're viewing this through Facebook, put in the comments where you're watching this from. We'd love to know that. And we can give folks a few more minutes to enter the room. We had a little bit of a glitch. We had quite a few people registered for this webinar. So we're looking forward to getting all those people back into the room. Natalia in from Kailua, mahalo nui. Let's see, is that Kailua, Hawaii, Kailua, Oahu? Never know. You never know.
You'll never know how much I love you.
Kailua.
Kelby is laughing. Kelby is laughing already. They said, you know, a good presentation has a great deal of humor in it. Without humor, you know, it is. Oh, yeah.
Oh, I'm loving it. I'm loving it. I'm enjoying it. You're making my day.
That's the way it is, to set the stage so that learning takes place. You have an agenda and it's just good on paper, and you adjust it and you bring it to life. You breathe life into it. Kelby is laughing. Kelby is laughing.
I think that agenda is already out the window, and that's okay.
Throw out the agenda. Throw out the agenda. The agenda is that what comes from the heart and the mind. Let Kelby go.
That's exactly right.
Kelby's laughing already.
All right. Well, all right. We have two Kane here who are chomping at the bit to get started. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to episode 2 of E Ola Mau, the next generation of Native Hawaiian health. This is episode 2 in this report back to the community series. And the topic today, we'll be talking about the historical and cultural perspectives on Hawaiian health. And this has been a big topic for a long time. This was probably the best publicized chapter of the 1985 E Ola Mau study. So I'm Kim Ku'ule Bernie. I'm with Papa Ola Lōkahi. We have a lot of really good staff helping to make this happen. Our IMI Hawaii, our data and research hale at Papa Ola Lōkahi is presenting the E Ola Mau series. And with your input, with your feedback, your reflection, we will be planning for the next update of E Ola Mau and other events, and all that you contribute to these reports will help to inform the programs, the services, the policy, and the work that we continue to do in the future. Following the presentations, our panelists will be answering your questions, so feel free to put them in the bottom panel, the Q&A panel at the bottom of your Zoom, or if you're viewing this on Facebook, feel free to put them into the comments section. We'll make sure that the panelists see them. Know that this presentation is being recorded and the links will be uploaded to the Papa Ola Lōkahi website, and it's being live streamed across many of our partner organizations on Facebook, including most of our Native Hawaiian healthcare systems, and also the Native Hawaiian Center of Excellence. And an evaluation will be sent to you upon your departure from this webinar. So mahalo nui for filling that out. We're very grateful to you. Now, without any further delay, let's introduce these two presenters. Dr. Joseph Keawe Aimoku Kaholokula is a full professor at the University of Hawaii. He's chair of the Native Hawaiian Health at the John A. Burns School of Medicine at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And I believe his kupuna hail from the island of Maui.
And Hawaii.
And Hawaii.
my
Oh,
mama said.
because you're
And
Keawe.
Papa side on polele Keawe.
We also have with us Anakala Earl Kava'a, social worker, educator. His kupuna, he comes from a long line of kahu and on Molokai, East End Molokai, in fact, and he is a past recipient of the Ka'onohi Award and Living Treasure. So I would like to turn it over to our presenters. We'll start with a presentation from Dr. Kaholokula, and to both of you, Kava'a and Keawe, to both of you, welcome. Aloha.
Mahalo nui loa.
E kalamai, just getting my PowerPoint up here. Velina me ke aloha ia kākou. Mahalo e Papa Ola Lōkahi. Aloha e Anakala Kava'a mai e ka mahi ai nui a hina nui a Molokai. Aloha mai kākou. Yeah, I'm gonna, as Uncle Earl Kava'a has already set the foundation for us, that the agenda went out the door and that we're going go where we need to go on this. He's also asked me to begin our conversation because the series is entitled E Ola Mau. It's important for us to situate our talk in that context.
Exactly.
E Ola Mau, a life that continues and continues on into perpetuity. What it means to me is that we continue to have life as kanaka that was passed down from our ancestors and will continue to go forward. And we're going to discuss some of that today. Unfortunately, there are stumbling blocks and hurdles for us to overcome. We have overcome and we'll continue to overcome. But E Ola Mau really speaks to our intent of perpetuating those things that bring us life and wellness in all of its manifestations. And what I would like to do in setting the stage for Uncle Earl and the discussion around the recommendations from the E Ola Mau Report is to really set a foundation around the historical and cultural determinants of kanaka iwi health. And I'm going to be brief as possible so we can have a good kuka session.
Yeah. If you know.
Kala, my computer is a little slow. And I always like to start any discussion around health with a very positive start. And I like to reflect back to the point in time in which our ancestors came in contact with foreigners. Well, of course, there's questionable whether Captain James Cook and his expedition was the first time our ancestors came across these foreigners, but certainly it was the first time it was documented of the interactions that they had. When Captain James Cook and his expedition came to Hawaii in 1778, they took extensive notes and journals of their daily experiences and it's across the Pacific, not just here in Hawaii in our Pai'aina, but across the Pacific, wherever they went, they couldn't help but notice the health and well-being of the indigenous populations, our ancestors. Counter to what we came to believe later after others had come and changed the narrative for us about our health and well-being, what Captain Cook and his men observed was a very healthy and robust and thriving population. And here are some quotes directly from the journals of Captain James King, one of the other officers there, and David Samuel, the surgeon on board that expedition. The natives of the islands are in general above the middle size, well-made, walk very gracefully, run nimbly, and capable of great fatigue. That's our physical health they were describing. Our social health, they described our ancestors as very mild, agreeable tempers, and friendly, good-natured, lively, much like Uncle Earl Kava'a is today, both physically strong and both lively and jovial. So a very good example of what Captain James Cook and his expedition came across. But a lot has changed since then, yeah? Certainly today, most often we're not described on average as being capable of great fatigue because of chronic diseases now that unfortunately affects our people. But let me start a little bit with, and I'm not going to cover all of this because many of you probably are familiar, but really highlight some key things around health and some of the historical events that really influence our health and well-being today. In 1778, as I mentioned, the population was estimated to be anywhere between 500 to 800,000. Some even go higher than that.
Correct.
Now,
Yeah,
Mike, even if we go at the lowest end, 500,000, that's still significant. To give you a point of reference, there's roughly 540,000 Native Hawaiians, people who identify as Native Hawaiians right now in Hawaii and on the continental US. So that's how much of our ancestors were around in 1778 on this Pai'aina. But they introduce a lot of things, yeah, not just their cultural ways and other ideas, but they also introduce, unfortunately, infectious diseases that had a huge effect on the health of Kanaka at this time. Infectious diseases for which they had no natural immunity to ward off. And many things were happening simultaneously as our populations were decreasing, being affected by these infectious diseases. Some examples: whooping cough, mumps, smallpox, measles, what we call a common flu today, devastating our populations because we had no vaccines or no treatment at the time. And at the same time, there were these things happening to us on a social, political, and cultural level that was changing rapidly for us in this new world. Although our ali'i and our ancestors were masters at navigating this new world and quickly adjusting and changing, the toll, the chronic diseases, the infectious diseases, other things were taken, and the speed by which it was happening was becoming problematic for our ali'i and for our kupuna at the time. And we all know that there were several things. I'm going to show another slide shortly that will highlight a few things I'm talking about. But one of the things I want to say is, we were progressive. Our ali'i and our ancestors were very progressive for their time. For example, we were the first to have a board of health or a public health office or a government office dedicated to the health of a population before the United States had one in 1851. Now, I'm going to highlight a few key events that have happened since the arrival of Captain Cook and his expedition, along with the infectious diseases that were introduced. But there were some significant public health and medical advances that were happening, public health advances mainly, that were happening in our islands in response to all these things that were happening, primarily the infectious diseases, but also to address more broadly the health and well-being of our ancestors at the time, which really has set a foundation for us today. And you can see many of that here, along with other historical events. But our kupuna, again, was pretty progressive in their time, establishing the first board of health, recognizing legislation appropriating funds for public health. And then, what people don't realize is Hawaii was one of the first places to get the smallpox vaccination after it was discovered. In 1854, it came to our islands via Australia and New Zealand. And our people, our ali'i, readily took to that to stop the smallpox epidemic that was happening in the islands. But between 1778 and 1855, when Kamehameha IV took the throne, our population had declined from 500,000, I'm taking the smaller end of that, to 70,000, which led to the establishment of the Queen's Hospital in 1859. Now, I'm going to stop here and take a pause a bit to kind of reflect on what was happening to our kupuna at the time. As you can imagine, there was a lot of people dying around us, our ancestors, our families. If you were alive at the time, it was likely that you would have lost many family members, friends, and colleagues and others to these terrible diseases. And Dr. Bushnell, who wrote the book with the ironic title, The Gifts of Civilization, Germs and Genocide in Hawaii, really highlights the psychological trauma that was impacting our people. The world was changing rapidly. Things were happening at a very fast pace, and there was a lot of things that seemed uncontrollable at the time for our ancestors. Just to give you an idea of really situating what was happening, there was many great things happening, many advances happening in our kingdom, but there was also these other things happening to everyday folks across the Pai'aina, and the lives they were living, and the things they were dealing to maintain their health and well-being. And as I mentioned, in 1859, Queen Emma and Kamehameha IV established what was at the time the Queen's Hospital, now the Queen's Health Systems. Here, they established it originally what's called the Punch Bowl campus, but actually Mana Mana is the traditional name of the area. And it was established at a time when there was really no medical treatments. There was very little medicine could do. It was still in its infancy. So most times it was really compassionate care that was being delivered to folks in the hospital, because again, there was no vaccines to ward off these. There was no pills to take that would help at the time. There was still no real understanding of how germs and viruses worked. At that time, surgeons were not wearing gloves. They were delivering babies without washing their hands, because the state of knowledge and science at the time was very, very poor, unfortunately. But we progress, we continue. E Ola Mau right into the 1900s, right? And we continue to assert ourselves as Kanaka, right? We know about all the things that happened in the 1920s that led from Prince Kuhil, John Wise, and others that led to the establishment of the Department of Hawaiian Homelands for our people and so forth. But I'm going to fast forward, because in the 1900s, we saw a decline in infectious diseases, but we saw a rise in chronic diseases as a result. So of course, in the 1900s, due to public health advances and medical advances, we were able to stifle, if not get a handle on, the infectious diseases that were wiping out our population. But as that was happening, what we were switching to was chronic diseases, diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, for example, yeah. And a lot of things were happening to our population. And it was really, a lot of our kupuna at the time, and I'm told this by my kupuna, that, it was sometimes embarrassing to be a Hawaiian at the time. If they could pass for Chinese or for something else just to get a job, they often would. And we all know too that even the language was discouraged, and it was almost nearly wiped out. Fortunately, some mana leo like Uncle Okava are still around to revitalize our language. But these were things that our people were dealing with. They were trying to assimilate. They were trying to achieve the American dream. But the American dream, it wasn't part. They weren't in that dream, unfortunately, from the settlers, right? And so they struggled. 1970s come around. It's the second Hawaiian Renaissance. It's often referred to as the Hawaiian Renaissance. It's actually a second. Under Kalakaua, King Kalakaua was actually the first when he revitalized hula and other practices under his reign. The second Hawaiian Renaissance in 1970s was really a reaction to what was happening in our Hawaiian community, right? The continued deterioration of our cultural values and practices, not achieving the American dream that was perhaps promised to our ancestors. All of these things, and the young Hawaiians at the time who are not our kupuna today, really stepped forward, and they said, well, in order for us to heal again, to E Ola Mau, we need to Hoʻi, nana ike kumu. We need to look back. We need to reflect what made our people healthy and well, and we need to bring those things back. And part of that is our ike. Part of that is the things that we knew that we done well, that were our scientific advances. So 1970s, we see Hokulea, the maiden voyage to Tahiti. Yeah? We see the revitalization of many things. Even the halau hula starts to grow and expand beyond tourism. And Kane start to come back and practice hula again as well, right? All these things happen. Of course, Kaho'olawe with the US Navy bombing, we were able to successfully stop that. That still continues to today. In the 1980s is the language revitalization modeled after those that were happening in Aotearoa, New Zealand with our Maori cousins that were brought forward here to help revitalize our language. 1988, the Native Hawaiian Healthcare Improvement Act that established Papa Ola Lōkahi here, as well as the Native Hawaiian healthcare systems, was passed and acted, as well as the Native Hawaiian Education Act. These are all wonderful federal legislation that help to improve the health and well-being of our Kanaka Oiwi here in our Pai'aina, and continue to do so today. And in 1993, we again have a president recognizing the illegal overthrow and President Clinton signing into effect the Apology Bill. And then we go into the 1990s, I consider the decade of education for Hawaiians because of the Native Hawaiian Education Act. I am a beneficiary of that, having received support to get my education in the 90s. The 2000s came around, yeah? And there were attacks against Native Hawaiian organizations. You may recall Rice versus Cayetano. You may recall the attempts to overturn Kamehameha's preference for Native Hawaiian students of Native Hawaiian ancestry. All of a sudden, there's these attacks on Hawaiian institutions, calling them unconstitutional. The very constitution that illegally overthrew our kingdom in 1893. But I won't linger there because I think we all know the history very well. Mm-hmm. But what I want to return to now is that, we are a thriving again population. Now here, I want to show you how well we're thriving. Now, again, this estimates from Swanson is 700,000 of our ancestors were around in 1778. Because of infectious diseases and other issues, it dropped to about barely 30,000. We were outnumbered in the late 1800s by foreigners at that time. But we have made a comeback and we're on our way back up. And it's estimated that by 2060, we'll again reach the population size that was estimated we had here in the Pai'aina in 1778. And I just, hele poina ole ke keiki, a lei never forgotten as a child. One of the reasons we are growing, and one of the fastest growing populations, is because we still have a value for family, and we continue to have larger families than others. But if we don't get a handle on the inequities that our communities experience around chronic diseases, and now with COVID-19, as we'll talk about more later, has also presented an issue for us. It's just more people with more, whose quality of life is not optimal if we don't start addressing it. So many talk about historical trauma. It's used a lot in indigenous communities as well as with African Americans in describing the historical situations that has continued to today, that is passed on from one generation to the next, right? They describe it as a psychological wounding experienced by indigenous communities because of past and present transgressions. Now, transgressions is a very nice way of saying what has happened, because often it was violent and forced upon us, and it includes interpersonal violence, forced displacement from ancestral lands, culture and language loss, compulsory acculturation strategies to assimilate our ancestors, and overt and covert discrimination. It's considered a intergenerational trauma because it can be passed on from one generation to the next, whether we like it or not. Unfortunately, because society will help us to perpetuate either false narratives of our people and ourselves that gets passed on, and we as Kanaka need to deal with, and which affects us as well. Here's a model by Mohata and colleagues, American Indian scholars who've been looking at historical trauma in American Indians, Alaska Natives, to understand the kind of situation that is going on that perpetuates the notion of historical trauma. But I want to also present that here in Hawaii, there has been also ways of looking at the historical and cultural issues to better explain the situation for Kanaka Oiwi. Actually, Kamehameha Schools in their report in 1893 was perhaps one of the first times in a report like the one they had put out for education that recognized that Native Hawaiians, Kanaka Oiwi, were experiencing what Martin Seligman, the American psychologists would describe as learned helplessness or learned hopelessness, which is a depression because of cultural loss, because of 2 centuries of rapid change away from Hawaiian culture. That's what they were saying at the time. This is the 1980s. And you can see on the right what they were presenting was a social ecological perspective, really that the unbalanced cultural contact between, in this case, Americans and Native Hawaiians led to some conflicts, some clashes, and ultimately American culture took over, and there was this Hawaiian cultural loss, which led to negative social outcomes, which then led to family and other stressors, which then led to issues for an individual. And it was a negative feedback loop, because as long as our people were not being able to thrive and live up to their potential, it was continuing this cycle of perpetuating this cultural loss, the negative effects of that. A psychologist by the name of Bill Resents had described gave a psychological perspective to what he called the Kaumaha syndrome, to what Martin Seligman would have called learned hopelessness now. And he described it as this, literally Kaumaha, heavy, dismal, downcast. And he describes it as rooted in a collective sadness and moral outrage shared by Native Hawaiians for the loss of their culture and nation. It's associated with oppression and discrimination, racism, poverty, homelessness, and all the social determinants of health. And it's expressed as sadness, sense of hopelessness, and often anger and sometimes hostility. But these are issues for us. But I also want to point out that our cultural resilience and assets are tremendous. And despite a lot of these concerns that we've had to deal with and overcome, we have been able to overcome them because of our collective strengths and assets, our cultural strengths and assets. I want to just remind us that the revitalization of our traditional values and practices, as Uncle Kava'a is one doing with his Born in Stone, is a fine example of how we're addressing these issues that we're facing by returning to our cultural values and practices and perspectives, leveraging those for health promotion so that we can once again, E Ola Mau. We also know that 93% of Native Hawaiians, despite their ethnic admixture, strongly and in most cases exclusively identify with their Native Hawaiian heritage and culture. 80% strongly believe it's important to maintain their unique cultural values and practices for psychological well-being. This is research coming out of Kamehameha schools. Despite more family adversity, Native Hawaiian adolescents actually report higher levels of family support and emotional support, which we can leverage for health promotion. And we know from research, cultural-based education strategies lead to better academic performance, cognitive emotional engagement, education and community engagement, and greater cultural pride and sense of place. So as we return to our traditional traditions, we're finding that it does help to improve our health and well-being. I'm almost out of time, so the last 3 minutes that I have, I would just like to quickly cover. What you see here is the social and cultural determinants of health, most of which I explained. Now, historical determinants are non-modifiable. They cannot change, they happen. But the other 4 pillars you see there are modifiable. They're things that we can alter. And most of them is on social and cultural things that we do have some degree of control in affecting. And what I want to do is end with 3 programs that have been developed that is really cultural based, that really shows the potential and excellence of our culture in health promotion. The first being the use of hula in our oloho. So E Ola Mau, Oloho Ika Hula, reviving health through hula. Our program showed that we can use hula to improve the blood pressure control among Native Hawaiians with hypertension or high blood pressure. And as you know, it's the #1 risk factor for heart disease and stroke, which also is high among our people. And what we show that is that a hula-based intervention can actually significantly help Native Hawaiians control their hypertension and reduce their 10-year risk for cardiovascular disease. And the benefits is not just clinical. We saw tremendous social and cultural benefits as a result of participating in a cultural practice. The other I like to highlight is the Board in Stone by Uncle Earl Kava'a. tremendously successful. These numbers are old. I'm sure it's well over 9,000 people that have completed this program throughout the Pai'aina. And it is, yep, there you go. It's a and empowers families and connects them to their culture in a wonderful way. And you can see the quote there from one of the family members about her husband. And I won't read it to you because you can read it, but this is a fine example of a cultural practice that not only affects our eatings, our issues around food and nutrition and food security, but really bringing families together in a cultural way to better communicate, to interact. And it has other benefits beyond the program. And then finally, even in the healthcare clinic, like our system, like Queens, which is founded by our ali'i, they have developed navigator programs. Ku'una na au program is one of them, in which they have navigators to help our patients, and they're showing great success. Because of their presence and their great work, they're able to keep Native Hawaiians out of the hospital. They reduce the rehospitalization rates. They're gaining them access to needed services outside. And they're doing it from a Hawaiian perspective because they understand our patients. And I'm going to stop there because I'm out of time and I really want Uncle Earl Kava'a now to take the stage. Mahalo.
Haunui, Dr. Koholokula. And yes, we do want to bring Anakala forward and talk story. I think what your presentation really helped us to understand what the understanding is between our history, our culture, and our health and well-being. And the promising approaches that you kind of closed out with, I really love to talk to Kava'a a little bit more about, tell us more about board and stone, not the logistics of it, but what is the impact of board and stone?
Well, yeah, oko wapau e ho'olohe ana mai I ke video nona mau moku apau mena mai Pai'aina apau o ka honu apau aloha mai wau no Kava'a u hanau I moku puna Molokai halawa. In short, I said it's a welcome to all of you who have skipped your work over here and watching this television program from around the world. I'd like to start off with looking at the words E Ola Mau. For me, kama, 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 a mau. And I'm wondering what is your understanding of those three words, maybe four words. Well, don't lose your hair. The word Ola is spiritual health, intellectual health, social health, environmental health. The word Ola provides for us an opportunity to talk at the many, many different levels. But the word Ola does not paint a picture for you. And let me try and paint a picture for you. You go in a mountain and you get a mosquito bite. And then you start scratching it. And then it bleeds. And then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. You got the picture? And then all of a sudden it begins to, and then it pops. And then Tutu comes over there and watches and squeezes it. And then it begins to recede. All of that pus begins to come out. That is Ola. You got the picture. You should get the picture. That's Hawaiian methodology in teaching, is to use pictures to paint words to explain what it is. The word mau is another word for ho. E Ola Mau, to continue. But the word Ola lands us, for those of us who have understanding, and for those of you who are still learning, it has many, many meanings. Maua mau means to continue, but mau is also means to snag. You don't know what that means, snag. You're on a shore, and you got your ulua line with a kepau, with a lead, and you throw it out in the ocean, and then you pull it in, and then it hits a rock, and it's wedged between the rock. It's stuck. That is mau. That's another level of understanding what the word mau is, as opposed to mau as in to continue. You see the richness of that? That's intellectual health. That's a Ola Lōkahi. And all of that is preserved, the well-being for us is preserved in the language. And so the more we know about the language, the better our intellectual, our health, the better our relationship with each other and with environment, it increases. It increases so that it is no longer political. It is increases so no longer it is administrative. It has ha in it. That means it is self-directed. It comes from within. And the last two words, amau, means to continue again and again and again. It's a nice phrase to talk about health, to protect your health, to watch over your health, to watch over your community, to watch over your family, not just today, but tomorrow and the days after and the days after. So what we need to do, maua mau means is that the Hawaiian ike has to be passed on. I have already let go many and much of my responsibility in board and stone to 30 youngsters. The youngest is being 7 years old, and that youngster the other night at Kalihi Valley read her essay, a 250-word essay, to 80 people. It is by design. For me, it is by design. It's not an administrative rule. It's not a policy rule. It is by design. Mai, loko, mai. It's the way I think. It's the way our ancestors talked about. I have, so, Kauka talked about public health. So I'm thinking about that word, public health. It's an English word. Do we have a Hawaiian definition for the word public health? So Keawe, I'm going to ask you the question. Can you describe in short words, in 3 minutes, what is Hawaiian public health? Take it. Time is not our friend.
Well, mahalo kawa'a for giving me that tough question. What is public health for Native Hawaiians? It is simply the overall health status of our kanaka oiwi.
Okay.
And whether or not they're living, we are able and capable of living to our fullest potential and achieving, I guess, mauliola,
Yeah.
optimal health and well-being.
Very good. Very good. Gang, this is it. And Kevin, this is not a put down. This is an opportunity for learning. I'm always about learning. So we have to define the word public because it is an English word. So what is public in a Hawaiian word? I'll tell you. Ahua'a. Moku. Yeah. Apana. So that is the word public. So when we think about public health, we think about an institution, an organization that we go to be healed. That's not Hawaiian thinking. The Hawaiian public health is they come to see my mother for therapy. They go to see Mama Besemake Kau for la'au kahea. They go to Mama Place for la'au. La'au kahea is bone for me, the treatment of bone. So the word public health is a Western definition that tells us we have to go someplace for health. The Hawaiian public health is this. They are already in your community. They live in your community. That is the Hawaiian definition. We need to interpret much of the English language into Hawaiian thinking to be well again from a Hawaiian perspective.
Kawa'a,
Yes.
one of the people joining the group provided what Olelo Hawaii for Hawaiian public health. Ola kino lehu lehu oiwi.
Lehu lehu oiwi. Yeah. Kahuli huli mai. There are many ways. That's it. So, for example, someone says, "Oh, I have a bad case with thrush. My baby has a bad case with thrush." So we would, on Molokai, you probably go to a public health, or you probably go see a doctor, and then someone says, "Oh, just take the medicine." So that word, that idea of public health, is really a commoner's, a common folks, the OEB people, is that they know about many of these medicines already. It's already in place. So public health is already ingrained, starting at a very, very early age. And you only went to see someone with a problem that you could not resolve to the next level. But those people already live in your community, in your apua'a. So we need to define and have a Hawaiian understanding of what public health is and what the modern day public health is about. It will enrich us when we start thinking as Hawaiians. Let's talk about the 7,000 population. Very, very quickly, that number 7,000 on Molokai, when they built the first pond on Molokai at Piko, they employed what is called the, I forgot the name. Anyway, there was Kiaha Ole, the Kiaha Ole ruling system on Molokai. A group of chiefs decided that they were going to build a fish pond. So they decided that they needed a hardened redneck guy like Kawa'a to do the project. So they assigned Kawa'a to do the project. Kawa'a's job was to build an army. Yeah. John Kaimikawa, in his chant, in his Olelo, says that there were 500,000 people that built the fish pond on Molokai. It's in an Olelo, it's in a chant. It's in a chant. It's recorded for 500,000. So if you have 5 people that's doing a project and you take 3 people away, they cannot produce the food. But you can take 2 people away and still continue to have enough food to feed the people. With that many people building and not going home and staying on the mountains all the way into Perekunu to bring the stone to Puko'o, you need to feed the people. So Molokai had a lot of food. The other point that I want to mention is that it only took us 8 years to develop literacy, 8 short years to develop literacy from an illiterate group of people called to us illiterate. And before, when I was around 21 years old and I had a big head of hair, I said, I was insulted by that word. I was insulted by that word. I'm no longer insulted, and I use it as a means to talk about Hawaiian intellectuality. In 8 short years, we were the most literate nation in the entire world. That means the Hawaiian brain was long developed, long before the arrival of anyone from other places. The Hawaiian brain was already there. Did we have computers? We had computers. Today it is called Olelo No'eau. You click on the Olelo No'eau and a whole story comes. That's Hawaiian computers. So we had computers long before. Did we have movies? Nanaki Ione. We had movies, but you have to define it in a Hawaiian way. Hawaiians, what we need to do is that we need to go back with regards to our health to eat poi again every day. Yeah, there's a problem. It's a nice problem to have. There's not enough poi. It's a nice problem to have. We just get more people to grow poi and grow taro, and we go to sell. Most of the people, the men, look like me and look like Walter Riddy. You know why? Because there was no McDonald's to eat. There was no ice cream to eat. We just ate fish and poi all day long. Fish, poi, and libu. Fish, poi, and potato leaf. So the health is in our means to change it around. The choice is, are we willing to do it? Are we willing to do it? We talk about sovereignty. I am a sovereign man. So the sovereign is not a government stuff for me. It's the intellectual process that I have that makes me sovereign. You can be sovereign. And the issues that we have to have with regards to becoming a nation, that's a political issue. That's easy to deal with. All we have to do is decide whether we want to follow somebody else or do we want to organize ourselves to become a political force. That's our choice. That's what we have. For me, it's to develop that group. Yes, become part of it. That's being sovereign. Become self-sovereign. And I'm sovereign because I know who I am. And I know my history. And I know my culture. I'm glad that I was raised on Molokai and didn't go to a private school. And therefore, I learned all that I know from my mother and my father. I'll end my story like this about public health. One day, an individual who was sick, and she was in the hospital for 3 weeks in a coma. My brother spoke to the husband, and the husband said that my wife is in a hospital, sick. And so my brother called my mother and said, my friend needs help. She said, I will do ho'oponopono. My brother said, will you come down? My mother said, no, I will do it from Molokai. To make the long story short, she went through the process of ho'oponopono, and her strength with Keakua, as in God today, she made a decision to choose Kepler today and not the old God. As many of our ancestors did, they chose to go modern, and some chose to go stay with the old, and some chose to do both. Back on the story again. So my mother said, call me tomorrow. So my brother called my mother. At that time, you had to put a quarter in the machine to get to Molokai. And if you were so lucky, you wouldn't get a party line to Molokai, where everybody else is listening in on the line. So my mother said to my brother, you tell your husband, you tell your wife that she will wake up in 3 days. In 3 days, she came out of the coma. 3 days. Hawaiian Ike, Hawaiian Mana, Hawaiian Ola, public health. Mahalo. Open up for discussion.
Mahalo nui. One of the things that we did when, we had several kupuna talk story sessions, but I remember meeting in Waimea. I think you were there, Waimea, Hawaii Island. I think you were there as well. But you introduced us to a process called a pu'ulu. And then
Bernie,
yeah.
wait, don't go to Pu'ulu because that's another subject over there. Let them stay with what Keawe and I talked about. We're talking about the health part. We're talking about E Ola Mau. Then we'll go to the Pu'ulu.
Okay.
The reason I say that is because when you have so many fish on the line and people got to decide which one they're going to eat, they got to think about it. Like I said, so you just have one fish on the line. That's what we're going to eat. And we're going to eat aku. We're not going to eat dry kala.
You got it. You got it. It's an interesting process, and we will come back to that another time. Then, not today. No worries.
Maybe later on. And then I'll hope them about that topic over there. But let's take some questions about what Keawe talked about. Come.
Right there. We had some questions already. Of course, the number one question is, can we get a PDF of these slides? So we'll get back to you. Okay, great. Keawe, Dr. Kaholakula, is it possible to share these slides with the viewers?
Yeah, I'll send it as a PDF file.
Open up for questions.
And we will share. We'll share the link to this presentation too, so people can see them by watching this presentation as well. Love your explanation of Hawaiian health. Others are saying that mahalo for this awesome presentation. I wonder if I could ask Tertia to pull up some of the slides that relate to the E Ola Mau report on this particular topic. And we will, as she's pulling them up, mahalo nui, Tertia. And by the way, Tertia is the shepherd of the E Ola Mau reprisal and upgrade. So we've talked about increased understanding. Dr. Kaholakula has really increased our understanding quite a bit. We've talked about some effective approaches, such as board and stone, and what's going on in many of the different Hawaiian serving organizations. We know many of the problems or the gaps in services and programs that need to be addressed. And those are usually solved with more money, better policy, and increased work development, health workforce. But I wonder if we can take a look at the recommendations that were identified in this E Ola Mau report, and ask the two of you or the three of you, maybe Kava, you'd like to introduce us to your friend there. And then we'll ask the three of you to comment on some of these recommendations. How are they still relevant? How are we tracking them? If they're not relevant, maybe we can discuss that too. But also importantly, how has the past 2 years of pandemic, how does that affect the cultural and historical impacts on our health?
The pandemic has been turned, was turned into a political war by Trump, literally.
Okay, that's also another topic.
That's also another topic.
For sure, but for sure.
But you're talking about how does the pandemic hit the people. The reason why I said that Trump did that, because because Liliuokalani had to face the same situation with regards to the import that the Chinese brought.
The
She took a
restrictions.
positive step and told all of us, all of our ancestors, to stay at home. Yeah, the doctor is telling the whole country, the world, to stay at home and take precaution, and we're not listening. Yeah, we're not listening because because we're playing politics with it. We're not playing with health. The government also said, at that time, told Liliuokalani, I don't like it because there are not enough people in Hawaii to go to the stores. And she said, I'm not interested in you making money. I'm interested in protecting the health of the people. That's what she gave us to deal with how we should deal with situation to include the pandemic.
Kim, Uncle Okava'a said it
Beautiful.
wonderfully. But to add to that, I totally agree everything he said. In fact, I used Liliuokalani was a princess at the time while her brother Kalakaua was on his world tour, and that was the third wave of smallpox, I believe, that hit our islands.
Right.
But community, you have community engagement up here. I would recommend maybe having another one around community-led programs. I see it differently. Community engagement is really a term used so that academics like myself and other professionals engage communities for programs rather than community-led, in which community really is the forefront. So I would break them out. I think they're both needed, but I would break it out. And I would say that community engagement and community-led strategies during the pandemic, especially for Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander communities, is a great example, Kim, of how community engagement and community-led strategies are so important. So important it was that the federal government, the US federal government, actually called upon already funded centers and projects across the US who already had strong community engagement with at-risk communities to expedite us solving the COVID problem. So I think that's a great recommendation, but I would separate it out. But I also think that the COVID pandemic has shown that Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders can mobilize effectively and lead effectively to address a major pandemic. Now imagine if Uncle Kava'a said, right, if we now leverage that for our other things and take it upon ourselves to remedy. What a powerful thing to do, right?
Yeah, let me give you an example. Listen, I have in the board and stone class, is that there were people who were for and there were people who were against. What would you say to the people who don't want to take it? So, it's part of Hawaiian thinking like this. And so I said to them, am I safe to be around you? Yeah. And so I said, just think about that answer like that. But you are safe to be around me because I took the precaution. Let me go one step further from an even deeper cultural perspective. So when one goes to see a Ho'oponopono person, that person goes to be well, not to be hurt. That's Hawaiian thinking. We don't think like Hawaiians anymore enough to be considered Hawaiian. We are maybe intellectually Hawaiian, but do we have the heart? You have to answer that question yourself.
You have to work at that, don't
It's not a political issue. Yeah, getting the shot is not a political issue. It's a health issue.
Mahalo nui. We do have two questions here. Uncle Earl, any suggestions on how to address addiction? Well, no, addiction to fast food and turn to our ono to traditional foods, fish, poi, limu. How do we break that dependence on fast foods and get the i'ini for traditional foods?
Like Tutu said to us, try it. It's simple. Try it. I don't like it. I don't like it. It's a common thing. And Tutu would say, just try it. Just try it. So it is not a long explanation. It's just taking words that you know and you've heard in your family that says, just try it.
Nice.
Surprise.
Second question. What are your recommendations or next steps we can do now to lift up health within public programs or within our health centers. And by the way, love every word you have shared. So next steps, Ike Ia Manava, to lift up health within public programs or within our health centers.
Kavi, take it, Kavi.
I think that question was for you, Uncle.
Oh, shit. So it's like this. There's no question about the intellectual superiority in the person who's delivering the health. Yeah, whether it is Western knowledge or Hawaiian knowledge, it is still intellectual knowledge. But that intellectual knowledge for the Hawaiian side has to be tied spiritually as well. Has to be spiritual as well. So I said, if there is I don't want to go see a Hawaiian doctor who doesn't know how to fix bone, but there is an Indian doctor from India that said, and he may be of another religion. They said, but that's right. He has the Ike. And that Ike for me, he said, it comes from God. So I don't have trouble. It's the way we think.
You know, if I could add to Uncle's, I know it's directed to him, but one of the things I've been trying to promote with our healthcare systems is, you know, one has to ask, are we being effective in addressing the health of all people, regardless whether you kanaka uiwi or not?
That's right.
And the answer would be no. You know, the US spends the most money on healthcare and health-related research, but yet we have the worst health problems of any developed, quote, of countries. So we have a problem. One of the things I've been trying to encourage, both in education and in our healthcare systems, is what I'm calling indigenizing our healthcare systems.
That's right.
Indigenizing, and what you know, Kava'a was talking about is taking a Hawaiian perspective and framework and approach.
Yep.
Is really applying that at a higher level across our systems. Because we got to ask again, we ask ourselves, are we being effective? No. Why not? We've lost other aspects of health and well-being in traditional Western medicine is absent, such as the spiritual, emotional, and a lot of what is affecting our health and well-being, the social, cultural, other determinants of health, is not, our healthcare systems aren't equipped to address those issues effectively. So it's always going to be a band-aid, yeah, the healthcare systems, that you're always going to have people with chronic disease getting treated the best you can, rather than preventing these chronic diseases. So it takes a whole different paradigm shift, right? The question becomes now, does the business model, can now the medical insurers and others shift in allowing that to happen?
Yeah. So, you know, like in my mother's case, I mean, if she probably went to see, that person went to see a psychologist or a psychiatrist, they should be charging that family a huge bunch of money. They said, but Ola comes from Akua. We have to understand that when we talk about Ola, it comes from Akua. When we talk about health, we're talking about dollars, green dollars, you know, right? So that's part of the pilikia. So my mother didn't charge, and so did many of the kupunas that went to help each other. They didn't charge, but they expected that individual to help others, and that individual know that they had to help someone else. That's payment. That's uku.
Well, a socialized medicine in some places.
Oh, that's right, socialized medicine. But socialized medicine is, we call it uku. Socialized medicine.
But you know, like education is a fundamental human right, yeah. Mm-hmm. And why are we charging so much for that right, especially making it unaffordable for those that need it the most?
Oh, poor thing. Thing.
So we gotta huli our thinking and our paradigms to really make it work, to match what the realities are in our communities. Yeah.
Yep.
These are great suggestions. These are great suggestions. And I just want to let folks know that, well, actually, I think it's about time to kind of close. Can I ask each of you for some closing thoughts from today's webinar? What I heard from you is community. Don't forget, we can have community engagement, but we also need to prioritize community-led strategies. And of course, the whole concept of indigenizing a healthcare system, or the way healthcare is delivered. What are some closing thoughts from each of you before we wrap up the program?
Take it, Kauka.
Well, I'm going to actually my last words will actually be Uncle Earl Kava'a's words. Because he shared this with me when I was at Waimanalo Health Center, probably over a decade, 2 decades ago, and when Uncle Earl was there. And we were talking one time, I don't know if he remembers this, but he shared an olelo no ea with me that actually inspired me in many ways. Aie kahale ke ola. It is there in the home that there is life, right? And I'm probably not going to do it justice on how he explained it to me at the
You're
time.
doing well. You're doing well.
But he did share with me, and it was in reference to a challenging case I was having of a family, ohana, that I was working with, that, what's happening in the home. What happens in the home is really the foundation of someone's life, yeah? And there can be laughter in the home, there can be happiness, but there can also be some other things, and to look to that. But that's the kind of a metaphor for our lahui as well, yeah? So I end that with that olelo no ea from Uncle Earl Kava'a.
Mahalo, mahalo nui.
Hala nui.
Yeah. It's like this. I ka pohu o kou lima, eia, ke ola. They said, health is in the palm of your hands. They said, you have to apply it. It starts with you. It starts with you. And it starts with you, as our ancestors did before. It starts with the pule. It all starts with pule. Where are you with akua? It's a question for each of you to answer. A malela no ka waiwai o ke ola o ka ia oe me ka lahui a vai I.
Mahalo nui, mahalo to both of our panelists, Anakala Earl Kava'a, Dr. Joseph Keaweai Moku Kaholokula. Mahalo nui for sharing this. Episode 2 of our E Ola Mau series, focusing on the historical and cultural perspectives of health. Mahalo also to our tech support gang in the back of the house, Tertia, who is the shepherd of E Ola Mau, and to Dr. Donna Palakiko, to Keabe Parker, to Momi Tolentino, to Kamuela Kala'i, all of whom have been listening in the back of the house here, and all of our cross-post partners, of course. March 16th, next Wednesday, we have the 3rd episode called Ola Lōkahi, and that is specifically behavioral health, mahalo Tertia, Native Hawaiian behavioral and mental health. And we'll be talking about, some of our presenters will be addressing suicide among Native Hawaiians. They'll be addressing depression and other Native Hawaiian behavioral and mental health concerns. And again, we're going to focus on what are the recommendations to move it forward. So mahalo for joining us on behalf of Papa Ola Lōkahi. We'll see you again next Wednesday at 12 noon. Aloha nui kako, malama, malama pono. E Ola Mau.
Ai, ola mau a mau. Aloha.
No.
Ola
Ai
Mau
ka poi.
a mau.
Ai ka poi. E lua lo miki poi.
Ike ia manawa.
Me ka vai.
Gavin, nice being with you. Nice talking to you.
Good to see you, actually. It's been a long time. It's good. And I always enjoy listening to
I
you.
know. Bernie is such a wonderful guy. Meet this is the kumu at the egg teacher that when I'm at Castle High School.
Aloha.
This is his Carlos. And so I come over here and I beat him up and I abuse him a lot.
Oh, we all know how that is, by the way. We all know. He was beating me up small kind in the discussion a little bit.
I'm very fortunate to get beat up by this man.
Yes.
We all got it. We all got it today, didn't we?
They said, yeah, hey, Calvin, did Hawaiians commit suicide?
That's a good question, because actually I did some research around that when Lilio Kalani Trust had asked me to share my thoughts on this. Long story short.
Yeah, long story short.
Depends how you define suicide, right? Like you said, from a Hawaiian. So there were incidents where there's mo'olelo. I'm trying to recall one of them, but there is mo'olelo. And in fact, one olelo no eal that but it's around the loss and grief and expression of one's love for someone, yeah. But whether or not it was like the way that it happens now, it's for all different reasons, right?
Yes.
And the understanding of it, I think, is different.